SDG 1 is to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Within SDG number 1 are 4 targets, of which this video will focus on target 1.2, which is, by 2030, reduce at least by half the proportion of men, women and children of all ages living in poverty in all its dimensions according to national definitions. The year 2030 has been set as the deadline for this target, to be met in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals as a whole. For this particular target, distinct from the previous target 1.1 of eliminating extreme poverty, we need to understand how this target defines poverty. As we learned in the previous video, extreme poverty is defined as living under US $1.90 a day, an international poverty line for extreme poverty. So what does the more generalized term poverty mean in the context of target 1.2? The term relative poverty comes in handy here, whereby the definition of extreme poverty is the same internationally at $1.90. Relative poverty depends on the cost of living in different countries. Each country has its own individual poverty line and therefore is also a reflection of the economic inequalities within a country. Thus the phrasing of target 1.1, according to national definitions, meaning the threshold each country, both developed and developing, holds for an individual or household to live adequately to meet their basic needs. A minimum standard of living for food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, and toilets. Another aspect of Target 1.1 worth exploring is the reference to poverty in all its dimensions. Whereas a national poverty line would traditionally be measured by an amount of income or consumption, a multidimensional approach to poverty broadens the definition from solely income or consumption to include other important facets of development. Another measure of poverty heavily in use is consumption expenditure, equivalent to $3.20, with data measuring this obtained by household surveys. This consumption measure includes food purchased as well as food produced by the household itself, particularly pertinent to the least developed countries. Yet, this meagre difference of a threshold of $3.20 is common to the lower tiers of the middle-income countries. The World Bank forecasts 250 million people's fortunes reversed, pushed back under the measure of $3.20 income per day due to the COVID-19 pandemic. A quarter of the world's population, or 1.8 billion people, live under the $3.20 poverty line, in contrast to approximately a tenth living under the extreme poverty line of $1.90. This amount is less than at the adoption of the SDGs in 2015, with 140 million living under $3.20 a day, down from more than half the global population in 1990. The number of people living under $3.20 is comparable now to the amount of people living on $1.90 in 1990. Half of those living under $3.20 live in South Asia, as do a quarter of the extreme poor. This contrasts to sub-Saharan Africa, home to 2/3 of the world's population living in extreme poverty and a third under the $3.20 poverty line. East Asia has seen huge progress on eradicating extreme poverty in the past 3 decades, but as of 2018, 150 million East Asians lived under the $3.20 poverty line. Quite separate to the severe plights of the low and middle-income countries is the relative poverty experienced of high-income countries, generally synonymous with members of the OECD. For these countries specifically, the SDG index has an indicator for poverty rate after taxes and transfers, or the share of the population whose disposable incomes fall below half the median income. The Human Development Index has been published by the UN for the past 20 years, using a formula to assign indexes to countries based on per capita income, life expectancy, and years of schooling. Such indexes have since been expanded to reflect how the world now recognizes development since the UN agenda moved on from international development to further overlapping factors of deprivation encapsulated within sustainable development. The 2 official indicators for Target 1.2 are reflective of the concepts of poverty lines of multidimensional poverty indices. Indicator 1.2.1 is proportion of population living below the national poverty line by sex and age, and Indicator 1.2.2 is proportion of men, women, and children of all ages living in poverty in all its dimensions according to national definitions.